Imagine the taste of rusted iron in your mouth, cold, metallic, and holding the dried saliva of the person who wore it before you. It presses down on your tongue, flat and unyielding, until you realize you cannot close your jaw, you cannot swallow, you cannot make a sound. Now imagine the neighbors you've known for years, the baker who smiles at you every morning, and your own children all standing in the town square. They aren't there to help, they are there to watch, and they are laughing. In 16th century England, a woman like Agnes didn't need to commit a crime to find herself in this position. She only had to speak too loudly at the market, or voice an opinion that made local officials uncomfortable. That was enough for the men she grew up with to take her from her home. This is the scold's bridle, a cage of iron straps and rusted hinges locking around the skull. Inside, a metal bit, sometimes spiked, sometimes flat, pinned the tongue against the floor of the jaw. The bridle functioned as a theatrical, public announcement that this woman's body no longer belonged to itself. Consider the psychological toll of 6 hours, or 12, or an entire day tied to a post while your community treats your pain as a holiday. This wasn't a side effect of the punishment. The public humiliation was the intended product. We often look at these objects from the safe, comfortable distance of ancient history. We tell ourselves these were the actions of a more primitive world to avoid seeing the logic behind them. Silence her mouth, own her body was a transaction. It established a strategic technology of control, a blueprint for erasure that has been refined and scaled for the modern world. In medieval Germany, women who argued or refused to lower their eyes were locked into the shrew's fiddle. This wooden yoke trapped them in a posture of permanent begging, leaving them exposed to the elements and the town's mockery while they stood in their own waste. The authorities added a layer of psychological pressure by locking two people face to face in the same fiddle. They were forced to stare into each other's eyes and smell each other's decay, watching the person in front of them slowly break down. This mechanism shows the scale of the ducking stool. On the riverbank, the atmosphere was festive. The crowd would gather with food and drink to watch as an accused woman was strapped into this chair and swung out over the water. The ordeal by water operated on an inescapable logic. If the woman drowned, she was declared innocent. Her soul was accepted by the water. If she struggled and survived, she was declared guilty, as the water had rejected her. This was never a search for truth. It was a death cult wearing the mask of law, where the suffering itself was the only objective. Some punishments were designed to outlast the crowd. Authorities sought ways to turn a temporary accusation into a permanent physical disqualification from society. In Puritan New England, they'd sew a red letter A onto her clothing. But in reality, the cloth letter was the merciful version of the sentence. Public branding used these heavy iron tools. Heated until they were glowing, they were pressed into the cheek, the forehead, or the palm. This turned a woman's face into a permanent record of her accusation, a scar she would see in every mirror for the rest of her life. Across ancient Egypt, Byzantium, and imperial China, this escalation took the form of surgical mutilation. Rhinotomy, the cutting off of the nose, and the amputation of the feet were utilized to permanently disfigure women accused of adultery or disobedience. These were strategic surgeries designed to remove a woman from the world of human connection and desire. They turned a human being into a walking warning sign that no one would dare to look at. The European witch hunts scaled this erasure into an industry. Between 1450 and 1750, tens of thousands were executed. In many regions, 80% of the victims were women. The hunts were a business. Professional witch prickers used retractable needles to fake the discovery of the devil's mark. They would probe a woman's body hundreds of times, and when the rigged needle failed to draw blood, the expert would nod, and the trial would proceed to its predetermined conclusion. This 1711 act from the Massachusetts Bay Colony demonstrates the cold reality of the trials. It wasn't just chaos, it was bureaucracy. Every execution was documented, invoiced, and processed through the legal system as a routine administrative act. Even in ancient Rome, Emperor Augustus passed decrees legally reclassifying an adulteress to match a prostitute. The law was used as a surgical tool to poison a woman's bloodline and destroy her children's social standing forever. In Korea's Joseon Dynasty, the state practiced genealogical erasure. By striking her name from the official family registry, the government retroactively destroyed the futures of her descendants, making her entire existence a legal void. The deepest horror is the mundane nature of the records. Erasing a woman's life was recorded with the same clinical indifference as tax collections or rainfall reports. The blueprints for this machinery were never destroyed. They were updated with better public relations and faster technology. The scold's bridle is a museum piece, but modern doxing and the flooding of inboxes with threats achieve the same result. The goal is still to punish the voice and silence the speaker. The ducking stool has been replaced by algorithmically driven public shaming. A woman's social death can now be administered by millions of strangers in group chats, moving with a speed the medieval crowd could never imagine. Historical branding has evolved into the digital marking of revenge porn and leaked images, permanent scars that reduce a person to a single exploited moment. The materials have changed from iron to code, but the core purpose remains. These tools exist to control the body, silence the voice, and make an example of those who step out of line. Look at the daily news, the gossip, and the social rules you are expected to follow. Which pieces of this history do you recognize operating in the world around you right now? Calling this ancient history is a trap. It allows us to look away from the patterns that are still being used to manufacture fear and compliance today. The machinery relies on our willingness to forget. Erasure is only successful if no one remembers what the original blueprint looked like. Forgetting is the most complete punishment. If no one remembers, it can be done again.